All right, welcome to another installment of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition's webinars, which will focus on bicycle advocacy happening on a national, regional, state, and local level. Today's webinar is titled From DC to Your Block, and it's going to cover how national, state, and local groups build a bicycle movement that reaches from your hometown bike lane all the way up to Washington, D.C. We'll host Ken McLeod from the League of American Bicyclists, Andrew Dupuy from the Trails Conservancy, and Kristine Keeney from the East Coast Greenway Alliance to detail some of the work that's going on in their organizations. We'll cover federal stimulus that's coming out of Washington as we recover from COVID. We'll cover the Surface Transportation Act, which will fund all of our roads and bridges and bike lanes and sidewalks going forward. We'll cover open streets that are happening in your neck of the woods, and the efforts to knit together all of our greenways and parkways all along the East Coast and beyond across the country to provide safe and accessible transportation for all people, and what's in the works. And we'll have some calls to action for you as well, so you can join the conversation locally. So please do stick around. We have an hour for you for this webinar, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll jump right in. So as we get the attendees trickling in, maybe we'll do a quick round of bike joys. So how have your bike rides been going out there for you three? What joys have you experienced while you're out on the roads or pathways or trails? And maybe if you want to throw in a little bit of a bike strug, what has been your bike struggle over the past, couple of weeks? And yeah, maybe if it's okay, Kristine from East Coast Greenway, maybe I'll throw it to you real quick. I know you have a story.
Yeah, so I'm Kristine from the East Coast Greenway Alliance. I'm the New England coordinator, Maine down to Rhode Island. Bike trips or bike rides recently. I was just in Belfast, Maine, beautiful Belfast, Maine over the weekend on the coast. Beautiful weather, and I discovered the Belfast Rail Trail. I had never been on it before. Beautiful. It's a natural surface gravel trail, and then that leads into the Belfast Harbor Walk, which goes all along the waterfront in Belfast. It's just amazing to see all the different people out on the trail, running, biking, walking their dogs, strollers, things like that. So that's been my joy, is seeing all the people out on the trail.
Mm-hmm.
And bike struggle is I crashed my bike accidentally yesterday. No, did not involve a car. It was me by myself crashing my bike. I was on a bike ped bridge actually, and it was in my handlebar, the front of it actually caught part of the bridge. What happened was there was a weird noise coming, of course, like from the bottom bracket area. I looked down to try and see if I could see what was going on, and then managed to crash my bike. Luckily, only a couple scrapes, nothing major. It was pretty funny though, how it, I didn't get too hurt, so it's funny now. But make sure you keep your eyes up ahead, because you look down for 1 second and there you go over the handlebars. So.
It happens. It definitely happens. I mean, raise your hand if you've ever crashed your bike on your own before. Yeah.
Okay, now I feel less stupid.
There you go. Thanks, attendees. I got a couple of hands from the attendees. Good. Drew, how has your biking been going? What's your bike joy, and what's a bike struggle, if you want to go that far?
Well, on the weekends, we've been doing a lot of exploring of trails in the greater Baltimore area. I moved to Baltimore last year, so it's still pretty new to me. And I think I'm probably getting to know the trails and the area a lot better than I would have if it was normal times. I guess the struggle is just I'm missing that kind of daily commuting biking. Before, I was mostly commuting to DC, taking the train down, and then bike sharing across town to the office. And I'm missing that. I'm missing that just sort of regular routine of like urban biking.
Mm-hmm. I hear you there. Yeah. And then Ken, how are you doing out there?
I'm doing well. So I live in Roanoke, Virginia, and one of my bike joys is the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is, 10 minutes from my door. Mm-hmm. I guess it's also a little bit of a bike struggle right now. We had heavy rains over the last week or so, and there's a major road collapse that's going to shut down like a 15-mile section of the parkway to cars. And at least according to the Science to Bikes as well, although I know several members of my local bike team who have made it up to that road collapse and ignored those signs. So, you know, we've had some struggles in terms of access to our greenway system because that was closed down due to concerns over COVID. We got it reopened, and immediately we had 4 days of torrential rain that flooded the greenway system entirely. So mostly bike joys, but a few bike struggles just with access issues around here.
Yeah. I have a funny one. I was actually in Roanoke, must have been 4 or 5 years ago. I was doing the Blue Ridge Parkway in April, which is too soon to go out into the national parks because all of the facilities were closed. It was like a week before everything was about to open. And I started at the Skyline Drive, the very top there, made my way all the way down to Roanoke. And I was about to head off to continue all the way to Asheville. Hopefully it was going to be a whole 2.5 week trip. And some kind motorist said, oh, the road is out. There was a landslide last week. And had I not gotten that news, I would have continued my way into the deep wilderness of North Carolina. And I looked at a map and there was no way around it. I would have had to like literally have doubled back because otherwise you're dumped onto an interstate. So, but that said, I had a lovely time in Roanoke and did a 4-day stay down there, got an Airbnb, took some showers, and really enjoyed the transportation museum that you have there. So.
Yeah, it's a great city. I've been here about 1.5 years and really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and great mountain biking trails too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, enough of the preamble. Let's jump right in. I want to thank you all for taking your time to speak to those of us in Massachusetts who are interested in the policy and advocacy that's going on throughout the country. I'll do a round of introductions and then we'll jump right into presentations. I do want to wrap up shortly before 1 and allow some Q&A out there. So a little bit of ground rules and some housekeeping for those of you out there. My name is Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Bike, or the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition. We do statewide advocacy in Massachusetts, which means policy, funding, legislation, and then everything that kind of makes its way from the State House through the DOT to your local towns and cities, to your local bike clubs, and makes its way down to your riding. We cover a lot, and we're just one organization, so we try to do it all, but we can't do it alone. So I've brought my partners in advocacy here today, so I want to thank you all. We have Andrew Dupuy from the Trails Conservancy, Kristine Keeney from the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and Ken McLeod from the League of American Bicyclists. And I've worked with all of you overlapping and independently over the past 2 years since I've been at this role. I want to thank you all for coming and attending. And we're going to talk today about a few different levels of advocacy that are happening nationwide, statewide, locally, and regionally that mean recovery with the COVID response. We're going to talk about trails development. We're going to talk about open streets. We're going to talk about funding opportunities. And you're going to go home with some homework, which will be to contact your local officials to support some of the stuff that we need sign-ons for, so that they know that we've got a critical mass of people who care passionately on a very macro scale about fixing some of the problems that we have out there to prevent people from biking. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that those of you in attendance are not going to be able to chime in, except there's 2 ways to do it. You can go through the chat. At the bottom of the screen, there'll be a chat button, and you can jump in. Jim has already chimed in with a little bit of introduction to himself. Thank you, Jim. He's the president of Bike to the Sea. And we'll probably be covering a little bit of the Northern Strand with Kristine's talk because it's a crucial part of the East Coast Greenway here. So thank you, Jim, for your advocacy. But all the panelists, if you want to keep an eye on the chat, feel free. And then there's also a Q&A, which is down there as well. The Q&A differs from the chat, where an audience member can put a question in, and then we're inclined to answer it either over the air or writing. So please put any questions in the Q&A and any stories in the chat. And that's the way I kind of like to divvy it up. But without too much preamble, I'm hoping that the flow, we can start with Ken and then move to Drew and then move to Kristine. Is that an okay flow for you three?
Yeah.
Cool. And then Ken, I offered to run the screen for you. So let me just make sure that I'm doing that properly. And without any more preamble, I'm happy to figure out how my computer works. Happy to go ahead and share the screen, and then Ken, I'll ask you to kind of just take it away.
All right. Yeah, I see my slides, so that looks great.
Great.
Looks like maybe my fonts didn't load, but hopefully that's not a big deal. I'm Ken McLeod. I'm the policy director for the League of American Bicyclists. We're a national nonprofit based in DC. You can go to the next slide. We have been around since 1880 when we were advocating for good roads as part of the first movement to pave roadways. And we are dedicated to building a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. When I think about what it means to build a bicycle-friendly America for everyone, I think of this kind of acrostic, which is BASE. We spread the joy of bicycling. We organize people through advocacy. We make safety a political imperative, and we educate people to bike more and bike more safely. So we've been very happy to celebrate Bike Month over the last month with our hashtag Bikes Unite. And we invite you to join us now and in the future promoting bicycle advocacy and uniting by bike, even as we stay socially distant. Next slide. So one of our main programs is Bicycle Friendly America. It's been around for, I think, 25 years at this point. Massachusetts has 13 communities that are recognized as bicycle friendly communities, 7 universities that are bicycle friendly universities, and 36 businesses that are recognized. Massachusetts has consistently been ranked in the top 10 for our bicycle friendly state program, and was most recently ranked number 5 in 2019. All of these recognition programs are kind of driven by applications from the communities, businesses, and universities. And we work with state DOTs to get their information through an application as well. And really, these programs are a great place for you as individuals or as advocacy groups to plug into our work and kind of work with your community, business, university on that application process and push them to improve for bicycling.
Great. And just to jump in, I might jump in intermittently, Ken, so my apologies in advance.
That's
but
cool.
MassBike prides itself to help organizations, universities, and municipalities get through this process. So if you've got a bike club or an institution that is looking to become bike friendly, we can actually help guide through. We work closely with the league too. So feel free to think of us as a local resource here as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to talk about 5 things that we are trying to do mostly at the federal level, all of which have state and local implications, but 5 goals, big, high level nationwide. The first of which is connected, safe, and all ages bike networks. So this is really about getting more funding for biking and walking, make sure that safety funding is spent on biking and walking to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety, and make sure that there's complete streets at all levels. There are 3 bills at the federal level that you should be aware of for this goal. HR 5231, the Transportation Alternatives Enhancement Act. Transportation Alternatives is the main program that funds biking and walking infrastructure at the federal level. It provides around $850 million each year for those investments. And this bill would make the administration of that easier and provide more funding. So I'd like to thank Representative Richard Neal from Massachusetts, who is one of the sponsors of that bill. HR 3040, the Safe Streets Act, is a bill that would require states and municipalities to spend their highway safety improvement program funds on biking and walking safety if they have a certain level of bicyclist and pedestrian fatalities, which unfortunately most states and practically all municipalities do. I want to thank Representative Ayanna Pressley for being a co-sponsor of that bill and doing a lot of great work. And then finally, the Complete Streets Act would create a federal complete streets policy. That's been introduced in the Senate by Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts. So I want to thank him and recognize his efforts there. These 3 bills would be a huge part of transportation reauthorization, which we expect to happen sometime this year or soon, because the FAST Act, the last transportation authorization bill from 2015, expires this fall. So all of these bills hopefully will set policy for transportation moving forward, and set policy in a way that improves biking and walking and leads to connected, safe, and all ages bike networks.
Awesome.
Next slide.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in with Rep. Neal out in Western Mass. So for those unfamiliar, he's the Massachusetts 1st District, which includes the Berkshires and a little bit east enough to Springfield. And I believe he's also on the Ways and Means Committee as well. So correct me if I'm wrong there, Ken, but he's got some sway in terms of how some of the funding will flow as well. So he's a big bike supporter, and that's great. Rep. Presley, of course, is Massachusetts 7th, which is my hometown here in Alston. So big props to Rep. Presley, who's also on the bike caucus. Even though she's not a bicyclist herself, she is fully supportive of the biking movement here. And Senator Markey, of course, with the Green New Deal and all the rest that he's pushing there too. So we've got a lot of heavy hitters in our corner here in Massachusetts. And so feel proud out there, and definitely remember to thank your reps for all the work that they're doing.
And of course, if your rep currently isn't co-sponsoring, give them a call, give them an email, and ask them to co-sponsor and support these bills. Mm-hmm. So the next major goal is completing bicycle mega projects in the next 10 years. So these are really big interstate bicycle projects like Rails to Trails, Great American Rail Trail, the East Coast Greenway, and the US Bike Route System, which Adventure Cycling does a lot of great work around. The bill that is active in Congress on this right now is the Connecting America's Active Transportation System Act. It is introduced in both the House and the Senate. And again, we got to thank Representative Richard Neal for being a sponsor, and Senator Ed Markey for introducing it in the Senate. That bill is potentially really transformative in providing $500 million annually for these active transportation networks. That would be a huge boost on top of the $850 million provided through the Transportation Alternatives Program. Wow. So it'd be really exciting and a great place for all three of our organizations to work together in supporting this legislation, and we hope that the state and local organizations do as well.
That's a lot of money. And just for a little bit of context, I'm sorry to keep jumping in. I know a lot of you on this call are very passionate about the Mass Trails program, which is funding from the state. That's only about $5 million. So we're talking 100 times more than, nationwide, of course, but 100 times more than what we're currently looking at for trails out there. So this was huge.
Absolutely. Another priority of ours is better commuter benefits. So right now, commuter benefits primarily are based around how much it costs to commute. They subsidize parking in downtown areas. They subsidize transit, which is great, but the bicycle commuter benefit was suspended in the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So there's no benefit for people who bike to work. There's no benefit for people who walk to work. And when you look at what is incentivized, it is primarily parking, and it is primarily going to people with higher incomes. The top 25% of earners is about 6 times more likely to have access to commuter benefits than the bottom 25%. So we really think that that's a flawed approach. We aren't doing a great job of making people who need cheaper commutes have access to cheaper commutes. We aren't doing a good job of giving incentives for people to use lower carbon forms of transportation. And we hope these two bills can improve that. So HR 1507 is the Bicycle Commuter Act of 2019. That was introduced in part by Rep. Ayanna Pressley. She was one of the original co-sponsors of that legislation. And then there's also 2 other reps from Massachusetts on that bill, Lori Trahan and James McGovern. So we want to thank all of them for supporting that bill. And the other bill I want to bring attention to is the More Through TDM Act, which would make a federal definition of transportation demand management and fund transportation demand management, which can really help people use biking, use walking, use transit, and get people out of cars. Unfortunately, there's no sponsors of that bill from Massachusetts yet, but hopefully we'll get some.
Well, let's get on that. Yeah.
Another priority is making the United States a leader on road and vehicle safety. The United States really created a lot of vehicle safety regulations in the 1970s and has kind of been surpassed by other jurisdictions, notably in Europe, where they do testing for bicycle and pedestrian safety that we don't do in the United States. So right now, our efforts are concerned with getting Congress to act and force agencies to do some of the things that are done in Europe. And then longer term, we hope that agencies have their mission and kind of processes change so that they're doing these things on their own without congressional action every time to catch up to Europe. Because we really do believe that the US should be a leader when it comes to safety on our roads and in vehicles. So we've been working with Senator Schatz's office from Hawaii on the Cycling Safety Act that would prompt Federal Highway Administration and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to make improvements for road and vehicle safety. And we've also been working with a coalition of around 50 partners to make sure that if there's any automated vehicle regulations put in place, they include safety for people biking and walking. So we don't have any bills right now on those, but we're looking forward to supporting bills on both of those issues soon. And finally, our big fifth policy priority is bicycle education for everyone. Since the 1970s, we've had our network of league cycling instructors. There's about 6,000 in the United States right now. There's no federal bill on this right now. There has been some work in the last transportation authorization bill. There's a section called 405H that provides about $15 million a year for bicycle safety education. And we're hoping to continue to grow and advocate for more bike education for all people. Our goal is really to have everyone in the United States trained on how to safely bike and be able to use a bike by the time they've gone through 8th grade in the future. But it's a long way to get there. Those 5 things together, we branded as a Bike New Deal last year, and we're continuing to push on those 5 priorities. We see COVID-19 lending a greater sense of urgency as people are perhaps scared from transit, and we want to make sure that there's not the default to driving and more pollution and potentially more traffic deaths. Fiscal policy seems in a very different state than it often is right now. It might be more likely that we see large investments than we would see at other times. So we want to make sure that those conversations include biking and walking. And now is also a really important time to help transit in cities. They've been really hard hit by COVID-19, and we think biking is a great solution to many of the issues there. And we just want to make sure that policy and funding supports biking and walking being solutions to the issues that transit in cities are facing. So we're looking at 3 phases of advocacy during COVID-19. We're in emergency relief phase. We're looking forward to stimulus, where we might see some of those big investments, and then reauthorization. The transportation bill expires this fall. Something's going to happen. It could be this summer or fall. It could be later, but we have to be prepared and ready to go as advocates throughout the country and with all the other groups like RTC and East Coast Greenway to work together to make sure that that authorization bill is good for biking and walking. 2 things I want to note is there was a study by AASHTO, which is the major state DOT group, back in 2012 that found that greenways and sidewalks and bicycle facilities were the best job creators of all transportation investments. So that's a major talking point as we look forward to how we do stimulus, how we do reauthorization. If the concern is jobs, biking and walking projects deliver it. And then if you look back to the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act in the Great Recession, we saw a doubling of investments in biking and walking due to that. So hopefully that is a pattern we can see replicated through any stimulus and reauthorization coming in the next few months. And so that's my overview of where we are at the national level at the League of American Bicyclists. really excited to hear from Andrew and Kristine about their efforts and how we can all work together to make biking better.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks, Ken. I'm Drew Dupuy. I'm with Rails to Trails Conservancy. I'm their director of state level policy. So I do a lot of work with state legislatures and state agencies like DOTs and Departments of Natural Resources to increase funding for trails and biking and walking infrastructure. Galen, you're doing the slides?
I'll do it for you.
All right, cool, thanks. Get it up. So just a quick background on Rails to Trails Conservancy. We were founded in 1986. We are, as it says there, dedicated to creating a nationwide network of trails from former rail lines and connecting corridors to build healthier places for healthier people. So it doesn't, certainly rail trails are our origin and our bread and butter, but we work on really any kind of connecting, any kind of active transportation networks that connect people. And we have about 160,000 paid members and over 1 million supporters and followers around the country. And for this, it's worth noting that we do have a Northeast regional office. It's based in Pennsylvania, but it covers the whole Northeast region, including New England. You want to do next? So just kind of a three parts of what we do. We do work on trail projects, helping communities, providing technical assistance. We have a few signature projects around the country called Trail Nation projects, and these are big trail network projects. Some of them are rural, some are urban and suburban. And then you might have heard of the Great American Rail Trail, which we announced last year, which will eventually go cross country from Washington, D.C. to Washington State. In terms of policy work, and that's what I work on and what we're mostly going to talk about today. Since 1991, we've been advocating for more funding for trails at the federal level, and a lot of the same goals that Ken went into. We also defend legal attacks on trails, and primarily what I work on is promoting new and innovative funding at the state level. That could run from parts of transportation funding, like a gas tax and getting a piece of that for active transportation, to dedicated funding explicitly for trails, to kind of getting funding as part of parks or conservation or land conservation, other things like that. And what we want to do is promote these different ideas and replicate them so that, recognizing that, what works in one state isn't necessarily politically palatable in another state. And so we try to share best practices and examples in addition to supporting state and local groups with their advocacy. Next. So I did want to mention real quick, we have a fledgling network in New England that was hatched a little over a year ago, where I met Kristine and Galen. Actually, our Northeast office put together a Northeast Trails Summit. It was great. It was at this Appalachian Mountain Club Lodge in New Hampshire. It was snowing. We went snowshoeing, and this idea of a New England-wide trail network, the New England Spine Network, was hatched. And Galen, I know you've been working on this. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, just to chime in, I want to give credit to the Rails Trails Conservancy for thinking broader and more regionally. This is a concept that is more, to knit together current projects that are happening throughout the region under a single brand. But you can see with all of the different organizations that are chiming in and participating, we have amplification of our voices. So it allows Mass Bike to partner with not just, the trails that come through our state, with East Coast Greenway and a few others, but to really connect with Bike Walk Connecticut, Local Motion in Vermont, the trails groups in New Hampshire, and the rest of the region. And we're kind of thinking of this as a New England spine. And the vision is, of course, to knit together our rail trails into prominent, almost like, think of them as like superhighways for long distance commuting, but then that also do feeder pathways that go into our local communities. And if you just take a look at where Massachusetts is, part of this overlaps with the East Coast Greenway, although not all of it. We have multiple varieties of the way the spine can flow. Part of this is the Mass Central Rail Trail, the Border to Boston Trail, and more that are kind of some in progress. You can kind of see the white dashed lines are, work that needs to be done. This is, again, fledgling, as Andrew mentioned, so it is definitely still in progress and is not all encompassing throughout the state. For instance, the Ashwiltacook is not on here, but that's obviously going to be a major player in regional connectivity as well, and the Cape Cod Rail Trail and South Coast Bikeway, et cetera. So this isn't meant to be a capture everything, but this is meant to be, let's drive some focus towards a collective branding, so that we're actually thinking not just in our state, but this is a regional conversation, because we think we have more power when we're talking not just Massachusetts, but Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. And we have a long way to go. This is potentially decades away, but we're chipping away at this every single year. As Jim mentioned in the chat, that the Northern Strand is coming along, and with Bike to the Sea as a major push there. So this does make its way down to the very, very local friends of group level. So expect this to be more talked about with Rails, Trails Conservancy, and Mass Bike. This is one of our mini overlaps.
Cool. Well, thanks, Galen. So you want to switch to the next one, please? So where we're at now with the COVID-19 situation, Ken talked about how at the federal level, there might be some increased opportunities right now. Unfortunately, I think at the state level, for the most part, it's going to be the opposite of that. States are going to be facing really dire fiscal prognoses in the coming, not just the next fiscal year, but probably the next couple of fiscal years. And I think that that presents a real dire threat to trails and active transportation funding that does exist, much less new funding. So I think it's really important to underscore the increase in trail and bicycling interest that has come about under the pandemic shutdown. We found on some of our trail counters in the early weeks of the pandemic that trail use was up 200% by some of our own metrics. We've also seen a dramatic increase in interest in our Trail Link. It's our trail finding app and website. And you've probably also seen a lot of stories about how demand for new bicycles is through the roof. So we really want to, I think it's important to convey to policymakers and lawmakers that this is something that's seeing an increased demand. It's a way for people to get outside safely, to get exercise, recreation, and transportation for essential workers who might not be comfortable using transit right now. So I think to stave off and sort of inoculate against some of these cuts, I think it's really important right now to be reaching out to policymakers and telling them that you're a constituent, that that trails and active transportation matter to you. Because if they don't hear from people, it's just a lot easier when you're trying to cut the budget to just slash that line item that nobody's ever talked to you about. I think there are some possibilities. Oh, and just one other thing is that as we're heading into a bad economy, there's a lot of job creation potential. We found that trail construction produces more jobs per dollar spent than any other kind of transportation infrastructure. And when I brought that up, when I've been lobbying, that's always raises some eyebrows. So, but Ken did allude to the possibility of some stimulus. There's obviously the federal stimulus, but there is a possibility that some states might be trying to seize this opportunity. The fact that there's been a lot of job losses, traffic is down, that they might want to do a lot of sort of transportation projects as sort of a stimulus and an opportunity to improve their infrastructure. I don't know that a lot of states are going to do it, just because a lot of states are going to be in such a tight fiscal situation. I've seen one state, Utah, is coming into a special session next month, and they're planning a large, multi-billion-dollar transportation infrastructure. I don't know if it's a bond, but some kind of a spending measure. And there is talk about maybe including some active transportation in that. And if those kinds of things are happening, I think that's probably the best possible opportunity to get new or increased funding for active transportation over the next year or so at the state level. But otherwise, I would really be on guard and really try to reach out before they start cutting the budget. Reach out to your policymakers to educate them of why these are valuable to you, so that it's harder for them to cut that. I guess next. So another thing we've been working on is, is this fledgling notion of streets for social distancing, also sometimes called open streets or COVID-19 streets, or shared streets, slow streets. And it's a variety of things where you're closing roads we're limiting access to cars to increase space for biking and walking, especially increasing socially distant space for biking and walking. And as you can see from this is a screenshot of a map that we've developed on Rails to Trails' website. The size of the dots indicate how many miles these cities have done. And as you can see in the sort of bottom panel, those are the different types of interventions that we've tracked. And so we see that's a way to deal with a current situation where sidewalks often aren't wide enough. They're usually not wide enough to practice social distancing. And people really need places close to home to be able to get out of the house, let their kids run around, get exercise, and do so, in a safe manner. So we've been promoting that and working with local governments to support that and just sort of tracking and publicizing that. So we have a list and a map. You can see the URL at the bottom there, but that's just a really exciting thing. And we hope that, this will enable more biking and walking that will have a lasting impact even after the pandemic is over. Next. And so just since we're talking about Massachusetts, Brookline was one of the first cities or towns in the whole country to really do this. This is a schematic that they made showing how, they took out like a parking lane, some parking lanes to convert them into bike lanes and expanded sidewalks. And, it's not completely cutting it off to cars. It's just limiting car access so that people can spread out more on bikes and well on foot. And I've talked to one of the, Heather Hamilton, Galen connected me to. She's one of the select board members of Brookline and how they did this in the first couple of weeks of the quarantine. So it's just really exciting to see that in Brookline and to see it not necessarily in like a big, huge city, that cities and towns of all different sizes, shapes and sizes are undertaking these kinds of interventions to deal with this issue. And Galen, you've also mentioned that some of the state park department also shut down some roads in parks. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of been in different phases depending on the need. There's two different schools of thought which kind of overlap in my mind. One's for transportation and one's for recreation. The Brookline one was very much geared toward transportation and necessities, geared towards essential workers getting to the hospital, geared towards opening up space around pharmacies and grocery stores where there was crowding. So it was more utilitarian. But then along with Brookline, we saw the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the DCR, open up some of their parkways, put just simple cones up and bollards up to facilitate an expansion of parks, because along with getting places, we also need to get fresh air and mental wellness as part of this conversation too. So the DCR shut down, I think that's the majority of the miles that's being tracked in Massachusetts or the Boston area is from the DCR actually. They did a low-hanging fruit of parkways that didn't have any abutters, so there was no residential concerns, while simultaneously they were closing off parking lots at the state beaches and other popular state parks to limit crowding. So they didn't want to induce demand, but they still wanted to make sure the parks were open for local enjoyment. Yeah. So that's kind of like the two sides of the equation, which some people are holding separately, but I kind of see them overlapping because especially when it comes towards something like bicycling, transportation is part of the recreation and vice versa. And, I could use a route or a pathway sometimes to get to work. And I could use a route or a pathway sometimes to, clear my head and get some exercise. And both are crucially important, especially as this, the shutdown kind of extends into an indefinite time frame. So we're kind of seeing a multiple approach in Massachusetts, which is also something that we're tracking here at Mass Bike.
And last slide really quick. There's just my contacts, Tom, our Northeast Regional Director. We have this database of trail funding legislation that from different states that you can look at, and the map that I just showed of open streets, and there's also a petition you can sign to encourage your local elected officials to do open streets. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. We really appreciate it. And just for everybody's benefit, we're going to share these links afterwards. So if you've RSVP'd for this on our website, we'll send a follow-up with this with all the contact information of our three presenters. And I encourage everybody to take a look at the chat and the Q&A. I actually can't when I'm sharing my screen, so maybe I'll lean on the other panelists. But last up would be Kristine from the East Coast Greenway Alliance. And Kristine, if you want me to share my screen, I'm happy to, or up to you. You can steer this ship. Well, let's get you, I'll unmute you first.
Sorry, if you could do it, that would actually be great.
No problem. Let me just queue it up. And while I'm stalling, I'll mention a little bit about the state stuff. Drew mentioned about economic recovery and the uncertainty of funding. That is certainly true in Massachusetts. Right before COVID hit, we got a bond bill passed through the House, but didn't get through the state Senate. So right now we're sitting on a transportation bond bill. We don't know what's going to happen to it. And we're also didn't have a revenue package through either. And since no real definitive legislation is going forward in terms of funding yet, we are a big question mark here on transportation funding in this state. So keep in touch with MassBike, and if you have the ability to take a look at the committee chairs and ask them how's it going and how can we be supportive, because we want to make sure that transportation funding, which typically relies on sales tax, is going to take a big hit. How are we going to make sure that our roads, bridges, pathways, sidewalks, and bike lanes are still funded? It's a concern. So just sharing that. So thank you, Drew, for making that very front and center. All right, Kristine, go ahead and take it away.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm Kristine Keeney. I'm the New England coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance. I am based in the great state of Maine, but I work on trail development and advocacy for the Greenway in the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. So feel free to reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information a little bit later. Thank you. So just a really quick kind of blurb about what the East Coast Greenway is if you're not familiar. It's a walking and biking route stretching 3,000 miles from Maine to Florida. Right now, it is a combination of off-road traffic separated facilities and then also interim on-road sections. And it is the mission of our organization to partner with local, state, and national agencies and organizations to promote the establishment, stewardship, and public enjoyment of safe and accessible multi-user greenways linking cities and towns from Maine to Florida. So we work every day to try and move projects forward to fill in those gaps so that one day we have what some call more of an urban Appalachian trail where you can bike or walk, run as far as you would like between Maine and Florida. So I hope you'll join us in that effort. Okay, and just a little bit more about the Greenway. We connect urban and rural, north and south, along the most populated corridor in the United States, including cities like Boston, Worcester, down to New York City, Washington, D.C., and so on. But we also go through very rural areas as well. In 2019, we reached 1,000 miles of traffic separated trail and facilities, which makes it 34% complete. Obviously, we still got a ways to go to even get to 50%, but 1,000 miles is a third of the way there. So we'll keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully we can work with all of you to move some of these projects forward as well. It's more than a trail. The Greenway is also transportation. It is a gym, free and open to all. And what we've been finding, as the other panelists have said during this time, is that gyms are closed. And we've actually, seen some reports from people specifically saying they're getting out on the trails because their gym is closed. So that's great. We love to see that. The part of the Greenway is being open and accessible to all, that it doesn't cost anything. So even if you don't have money for a gym membership, you can have access to somewhere where you can bike, walk, and run whenever you want. You don't have to worry about what time it is. So that's a really important aspect of what we're trying to do as well. It's a community center. It's where people meet their neighbors. When I'm out on the trail, I just noticed that, people always smile, people wave, people say, hey, how's it going? What a beautiful day. And that's a connection to other people that we really get on greenways that we certainly don't get when we're driving. So that's important as well. It's a tourism attraction, good for local businesses. The Greenway is certainly used locally and regionally, but it's also used as a long distance corridor, kind of like the Appalachian Trail, where people do long distance bike tours. Some people do sections. Some people do the whole thing, Maine to Florida. We've actually last year had our first through walkers as well. So people have actually walked the entire thing as well. So if you're looking for something to do in the near future, and you can do it, self-contained with a tent, it might be a cool trip to check out. So. It's also a park encouraging environmental stewardship. The Greenway goes through some very urban places, but it also in those urban places goes along rivers and streams. In rural places, it goes through beautiful forests and farmland, and it really connects people with nature and helps them to understand why it's important to preserve these things when they're actually able to get out and enjoy them. And just some quick numbers. So again, Greenway is 3,000 miles. The route goes through 15 states plus Washington, D.C. It also passes through 450 individual communities, and 25 million people are within 5 miles of the route. And so now just to get into what we're doing at the moment, in addition to trying to move these projects forward, is we also focus on policy changes needed to accelerate Greenway construction. That's something that we're focused on right now at the federal level, but I also want to provide an overview of what the Greenway looks like in Massachusetts as well. So just really quickly, if you take a look at the map on the left, just pay attention to the green lines. The solid is completed off-road facility, and the dotted lines are currently interim on-road. You'll see that the Greenway comes into Massachusetts from the New Hampshire seacoast, which you might be interested to know that there's a great project underway called the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway. Is going to be built from Portsmouth down to Hampton in the next couple of years by the New Hampshire DOT. So that's not far from Salisbury. There's also a great trail called the Old Eastern Marsh Trail that I'll show a picture of later, which connects into the Clipper City Rail Trail in Newburyport. So really great section there. That also connects into the Border to Boston Trail in the area of Topsfield and Boxford, and then down into Salem and Marblehead. Marblehead just completed an extension of their rail trail as well. There's projects underway in Swampscott, and then also we'll talk a little bit more about the Northern Strand. From there, it heads west on the Mass Central Rail Trail over towards Worcester, and then south on the Blackstone River Greenway and into Rhode Island. You'll also see a blue line on the map from Boston to Provincetown. That is actually representing the ferry. So we also direct users to you can take the ferry and then get to Provincetown and then connect into the Cape Cod Rail Trail. And then from there, you can continue on the South Coast Bikeway through the communities of New Bedford and Fairhaven, and then eventually over into Providence, Rhode Island. You'll see the completed percent for our spine route, which is the Newburyport, Boston, Worcester down to Rhode Island, is 41% complete. And our complementary route, which includes the Cape and the South Coast, is actually 55% complete. So kind of interesting numbers there. And to learn more about the specifics of where the Greenway is and what the route looks like, please go to map.greenway.org. It's an interactive map, and you can actually put in a starting point and ending point. It'll give you the route, it'll give you the mileages, the elevation. You can actually download a GPS file for your GPS device, or you can also download good old-fashioned paper cue sheets. So I recommend checking that out, see where it is in your area, or look at planning a trip in the near future, maybe.
And I'll jump in, short of having a poll, because I didn't build any polls for this webinar, I should have. In the chat, if you're interested in chiming in and letting us know if you've ridden the Greenway in Massachusetts, part of it, all of it. Have you done the Cape Cod Spur and South Coast Spur? Just to get a sense of who is familiar with the East Coast Greenway, let us know.
Okay, so I also wanted to kind of go into some updates on construction. So in Massachusetts, the picture on your right, Galen, if you can hit next one time, is the Northern Strand Community Trail. Some of you may know that the trail is under construction. This picture is from Lynn. You can see it says bike path under construction. I always like to see those signs. This is an extension of the Northern Strand east into Lynn. The trail is also going to be upgraded in Saugus and Revere. The surface will be asphalt and no longer be that crushed kind of gravel stone that's out there. There will also be upgraded amenities added to the trail in Malden and in Everett. So a lot of exciting stuff going on with the Northern Strand. There's going to be, keep an eye out on Bike to the Seas Facebook page. They'll keep you updated on construction, and they'll also be posting an on-road reroute for while the trail is closed that we've been working with them on as well. So really excited for the Northern Strand upgrades. And this is, if you can hit next one more time, Galen. This is the old Eastern Marsh Trail I referenced before that's located in Salisbury. This is the Salisbury Newburyport area. The old Eastern Marsh Trail, if you haven't been there, is gorgeous. As the name implies, it runs along a beautiful marsh. And it's currently under construction and being extended north to the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border. And this picture, the Seabrook-Salisbury connector that you see here, is actually a new kiosk on another section of trail that will bring that trail from the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border actually over into Seabrook, New Hampshire. So it's a very interesting project where the local advocates in Salisbury and then also in Seabrook actually work together to get an easement over private property to actually get the trail to a trailhead, because the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border is actually, it's a rail bed that's lower than the road grade. So it would have just dead ended and there would have been no way to get onto the trail. So they worked out this great collaboratory process where they worked together. They got this little connection that got it out onto a road and built a trailhead in Seabrook, New Hampshire. So really exciting stuff as well. Keep up with the Coastal Trails Coalition that will provide updates on that construction. We're hoping fall 2020 for the opening of that trail. Cool. And last, but certainly not least,
whoa,
yeah, pretty sweet. If you could hit next one more time. Boom. This is the Mattapoisett Rail Trail on the South Coast Bikeway. As you can see, gorgeous. This is what the local folks there refer to as the Shining Tides section. What you see there in the picture is actually an elevated structure that was built to get the trail over the marsh area and to allow for the tidal flows to go in and out while also providing this absolutely beautiful section of trail. So this is still under construction. I think ideally it would also be done at the end of this construction season. There's a chance it could go into next year as it's relatively involved, as you can see. But once this is done, definitely head down there, follow the South Coast Bikeway on Facebook. They'll be providing updates as well. And do yourself a favor and check this out once it's completed, because it is obviously really beautiful, as you can see. Okay, so trail use, as my other panelists have also said, has really increased. We began looking at our counters in March when we started to notice that people were really getting out there on the trails. So you can see the graphic on the screen. These are some of our partners' counters along the Greenway. Really big increases. You can see there 100-200% increases in Connecticut and Philadelphia. The Back Cove Trail in Portland has seen a ton of more use, and it was already really popular before. So there's obviously some challenges related to trail management, but we try to work with our partners locally and RTC and the league as well to understand what are best practices at the moment. Obviously those things are evolving, but we try and work with our partners to provide those. So if you have any questions about what other folks are doing on other trails, we can try and point you in the right direction for signage and different policies and that sort of thing. And so to get back to the federal effort that we're working on, we're calling this our Greenway Stimulus effort, and we understand that it's really never been a more critical time for our nation to invest in regional trails and greenways with the major increases in trail use that we're seeing, in addition to trying to lock in the gains that we've had with reductions in commuting and emissions. So what we've done is worked with our partners locally, regionally, at the state level. In Massachusetts, that includes the Mass DOT, the DCR, regionally, MAPC, statewide, Mass Bike, and then also local organizations to come up with shovel-ready projects in Massachusetts and in our other states. So from Maine to Florida, we have come up with a shovel-ready projects list of $400 million. And those are in all 15 states that the Greenway goes through, representing 210 new miles of protected facilities and greenways. 60 projects in total that we've identified with additional funding could move forward to construction. And finally, all of these projects taken together would create 6,000 jobs. And as Drew said, that trail and greenway projects have been proven in research to provide more economic stimulus and more jobs than similar type highway projects. So we've been pushing this on the federal level. We've done a couple things. If you want to go to the next slide. So we've also created this map. I don't expect you to read all of those items on the right, but they're basically summarizing all of the shovel-ready projects from Maine to Florida. The numbers on the map represent the number of projects in each state, which have actually are always changing because we're still taking input from our partners on if they have shovel-ready projects. So if you do have one in your area that you are interested in getting on the list and it's not on there now, which includes the Mystic River Bridge, the Swampscott Rail Trail, Mass Central Rail Trail in Wayland and Sudbury, and also the Southern New England Trunk Line Trail in Bellingham, Massachusetts, and the Cape Cod Rail Trail Wellfleet Extension. So if you don't see your project on that list and you think it's shovel ready and you know that it's on the Greenway or you think it might be on the Greenway, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to talk to you about that and we can see if we can get it on there. If you could, yes. So in addition to the 400 million in shovel-ready projects, we've also talked to partners, including my fellow panelists and others around the country, to identify additional need for greenways and trails across all 50 states. This would include the Great American Rail Trail as well. And that need that we've identified adds up to $25 billion in need for greenways and trails across the country. So in addition to talking to our congressional delegations in all 15 states about the 400 million in shovel-ready projects for the East Coast Greenway, we've also been talking about the larger need across the country for 25 billion for greenways and trails to our congressional delegations. And we're interested to know if your trail organization or municipality or group supports this Greenway stimulus effort. We have been promoting a sign-on letter for organizations and municipalities to sign on that we will be sharing with leaders of the House and Senate. And I will, Galen, if you could just press next. If you can if you're interested, go to greenway.org/stimulus to learn more about this effort and also to sign on to our letter. And I just put it in the chat box as well. So please go there if you haven't yet and please sign on. We're also sharing that with our congressional delegations as well to show them. At this point, we've had almost 150 organizations sign on. So we're doing well, but let's get to 200. It's really showing that there's a significant need out there. And lastly, I just want to say that our outreach to congressional leaders so far in New England has been really, really positive. We've had conversations with Senator Collins of Maine. We'll be speaking to Senator Shaheen's office this week. We spoke to Senator Warren and Senator Markey's office, Senator Whitehouse in Rhode Island, Senator Coons and Carper of Delaware, so in the Northeast. We've also had great conversations with Senator Presley's office in Massachusetts. Representative Presley's office, Representative Pingree in Maine, Representative Pappas in New Hampshire, and Representative Langevin in Rhode Island. So we're trying to spread the word. If any of those folks I just mentioned are your representatives in Massachusetts, please reach out to them about the Greenway stimulus and the 25 billion across the country needed for greenways and trails. That'll help amplify our message that folks in Massachusetts want to see this happen. So please go to greenway.org/stimulus, sign on to our letter, and also please reach out to your representatives asking them to support this effort. My contact information, I will also put in the chat box, and you can feel free to reach out to me about any of this in the near future.
Awesome. Kristine, thank you so much for the overview and the work that you're doing. It is ambitious. Before we wrap up, I do want to go through some questions in a second, but I do want to thank Drew and Kristine and Ken for taking your time for introducing us to some of your work and the fact that you're pushing forward and overlapping. I think one thing to keep in mind is that we are not alone in our work. Mass Bike is a coalition. East Coast Greenway as an alliance, for instance. So we're all depending on the local advocates. So I'm really heartened by the fact that in the Q&A and in the chat, we're seeing some folks who are representing local trail advocacy organizations. And again, this does come down to the local battles and makes its way up. It's really a grassroots movement that we're pushing here. So we're proud to have Drew, Kristine, and Ken doing Trails Conservancy, East Coast Greenway, and the League to think about some of the broader, bigger picture funding, specifically related towards stimulus, specifically related towards the arguments of job creation, and then, let alone the fact that we do need to spend the $25 billion to connect across the entire country, because everybody should have the right to have safe and accessible bicycling and walking and recreation and transportation. So I do want to say thanks. For those of you who need to hop off at 1, that's fine. We're going to record this, but if it's all right, I kind of want to go through a little bit of Q&A for the 3 of us, just for the 3 of you, for just a few more minutes to cover some stuff here, and feel free to interject. And so let's see. One of them, Kristine, I think, actually maybe this was Drew. You were mentioning the increase of counts on trails. So one of the questions in the chat is about automated counters. And let me see if I can find that one on here. What are the methodologies used for documenting and recording usage on rail trails? And this is a question that comes in because somebody who did this contributed when they were working for Caltrans decades ago, but back then it was all manual, which is somebody with a checkbox and a piece of paper. How are these being automated on the trails that you use? Where are the deficiencies? And do you rely, which I know I'm kind of giving you a softball here, do you rely on local organizations to help out with those trail counts, and how can people jump into that process?
Well, Ken answered in the chat a little bit some of the different products that are out there. I'm not very familiar with our trail counting. We have a research director who manages a lot of that, and we do have counters not on every trail by any means, but on a selection of trails all over. So yeah, I don't know. I could, if who was that? Chris. Mm-hmm. Chris email me. I could ask one of my colleagues, but I am not a trail development person, and I'm not the right one to answer this.
Yeah, I'd say EcoCounter is one of the major ones. They do a lot of those prominent counters that you'll see on a major bike route that shows like the daily cyclists and then like the monthly or yearly totals, the like bikeometer. So that's a great company. I don't know the ins and outs of the methodologies, but I know that they count people biking and walking.
Cool.
I can mention a couple more things. EcoCounter definitely appears to be the gold standard at the moment for bicycle and pedestrian counters on trails. They're infrared counters, so they send out a little infrared signal, and when people cross it, it counts them. They also have a feature where you have kind of loops that are in the ground, and those help to differentiate between bikes and peds. So that's interesting as well. They have an option where the counter is actually housed in a kind of a wooden pole. So it's discreet. It helps to reduce vandalism of the counters because they're actually inside that pole. So they're a great option. They have a really user-friendly dashboard where the data directly downloads to that, and you can visualize it in different ways. You can compare different time periods. There's different graph options and things like that. So definitely recommend EcoCounter, and we need more counters out there, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I also threw in the chat. I know we're talking about trail usage increase, but what I also found really fascinating was one of the counters that I track, which is Kendall Square in Cambridge, which is right in the heart of the biotech industry. They have their public data because it's Cambridge, of course, all the data is public. And even though we're seeing, upwards of 200% increases on trails, we saw a 75% decrease in the counter at Kendall Square on Broadway between April 2019 and April 2020. Obviously, that's to be expected because people are not commuting into work, and it really is like an urban commuter. And if everybody's staying at home, we're not going to see the on-street commuter counts going up. But I just thought it's really fascinating to show the dichotomy. As trail usage increases, we're seeing the commuter counts like completely bottom out. So if you, I put the counter link to the live counter in the chat, and folks can check out the graph, which is pretty regular, and then we hit like mid-March 2020 and it just drops. So different uses for different counters for sure. And you know, as advocates, it's up to us to figure out kind of the reasoning why, so that we're supporting those riders. So right now it might be important to really push trail usage if we're seeing a recreational uptick and we're seeing folks kind of do more regional biking. Whereas if this were a normal, you know, end of May and we were doing our Bike to Work Friday, that Kendall Square counter would probably be spiking right now. Cool. Let's see what else we have here. Robin from the Friends of the Mattapoisett Rail Trail. Awesome work that's going on in Mattapoisett. She asked when the Mass Trails grants will be awarded. I don't know. That's going to be a DOT question. So I'll pass that question along to Pete Sutton, who is the state bike ped coordinator for Mass DOT, and I'll loop you in, Robin. So feel free to get in touch with us. And I love the work that's going on in Mattapoisett. It is important, the South Coast Bikeway. Kristine and I actually did a ride last year, which is Providence, Rhode Island, out to P-Town to reroute some of the East Coast Greenway. And we saw where the Mattapoisett Trail was being constructed into the woods. And it was really cool to know that in a year or two, we'll be able to continue on that and do that awesome ramp over the tides. And also a side note that your state representative, Bill Strauss, is the chair of the Transportation Committee. So the more that you can invite Rep. Strauss to ribbon cuttings or bike rides down in the Mattapoisett Rail Trail or the Phoenix Rail Trail there, is just, you know, more support, the better, especially in the State House, because that's where a lot of these decisions and funding calls get made. So part of the ask and takeaways, just to round out there, is to thank those who have signed on to the letters and the stimulus and the packages and the funding, to ask those who haven't to please sign on, and then to always remember that everybody loves ribbon cuttings, especially if it's a rail trail ribbon cutting. We can get 300 people on a Tuesday afternoon to come out to a ribbon cutting on a rail trail because it's that well loved. And again, this is not just for recreation. This is not just part of the 3,000 miles. This is how people are getting to work. This is how essential workers are transporting themselves. And what we need to do is kind of do the infill. And yeah, it's a collaborative process. If there's not anything more, I'll kind of leave some last words for the three of you. And again, thank you so much from Mass Bike and all of us who are attending here. We'll put this live on our YouTube channel and send out the recording to everybody as well. But to Drew, Kristine, and Ken, thanks so much for the work. Is there anything else you want to chime in before we head off?
I'm good.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting us here, and it's great to talk to all of you, and looking forward to working more with Drew and Kristine in the future.
Excellent.
Yeah. Cool. Forward to it too. Thanks, Gary.
Excellent. And then I'll also mention that these are all membership organizations. So along with being a Mass Bike member, please join Trails Conservancy, the East Coast Greenway, and the League. We're all fighting the same fight, but we're doing it together, and collectively we can be stronger. So I really appreciate everybody's chiming in. Stay tuned for more Mass Bike webinars. We have them pretty much weekly. You can go to our website under our work page. We have all of our webinars listed, including our past webinars on their pages. Next week, we're going to talk about bike maintenance. So, and then I think we're going to take a week off because it's been pretty hectic. And then we're going to come back and probably, we're going to coordinate one about bicycling authors, bike history, and children's books. So we're trying to get a variety of diverse offerings for you so that we can stay engaged, stay plugged in, and stay advocating while we're staying at home. So my sincere appreciation for you three for chiming in, and we've got some work to do.
We do.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.